처음 영상이 시작되면 화면에는 아무런 메뉴가 나오지 않습니다. 이때 영상 화면에 마우스를 대면 아래에 메뉴가 나옵니다. 만약 화면에 마우스 클릭을 하게 되면 영상은 멈추기 때문에 마우스 커서만 대셔야 합니다. 그 다음에 자막 메뉴를 클릭하시면 화면 중앙에 영어로 된 자막이 나타납니다. 이 상태에서 자막을 선택하기 위해 설정을 클릭합니다. 설정을 클릭하면 자막을 선택하는 메뉴가 나옵니다. 여기서 자막을 클릭합니다. 그리고 자동 번역을 클릭합니다. 그러면 다양한 언어가 나오는데 여기서 한국어를 선택합니다. 한국어를 선택하면 화면에서 보듯이 한국어 자막이 시작됩니다.
I wish I was with you today, but today I'm traveling in Europe, ending my trip at one of your sister institutions, Emmanuel Christian University in Oradea, Romania. And I'm going to be spending some time with the business and economics faculty on this whole question that you're going to be talking about today, integrating one's faith with the demands of one's work. So have a great day, and I'm glad you're here.
Bill, from your perspective, what do you see as the need in the world today for management and leadership development? Is there a missing ingredient out there?
Sometimes I use those words, Al, interchangeably, management and leadership. So let me do that as I respond to that question. First of all, and as I respond today, I'm going to respond a lot to Peter Drucker. We'll talk quite a bit about Peter Drucker. I had the privilege of not only being benefited by his advice, but he was also a friend, a counselor, and a mentor. And one of the things he said about leadership is that leadership in and of itself is really not something to be sought after. Leadership is just a means. To what end is the real question. And the end of leadership is the people that follow and the direction they're going. And so in response to your question, it is really that point that if you're a leader, you're responsible for the people that follow and the direction they're going. Another thing Peter used to say is a leader has only one choice to make, to lead or mislead. And it's an awesome responsibility. And I think you could go into a bookstore today and you could get shelf upon shelf written about leadership. But not much is said about the awesome responsibility of leadership, and that gets really to the people that follow and what's happening to them under your leadership. And I think that's a point that needs to be emphasized, and then a point that also needs to be amplified so that people can understand how to fulfill that responsibility.
Would you share with us a few examples of what it means to care about people in a very real way in a business?
Yes, I can give you some examples, Al, about this whole issue and responsibility of raising the question of God, and then how it was played out, as well as touching about some of the things you asked earlier about leadership. First example I'll share with you is a practice we had in Service Master, where when a person got a senior position over a large group of people in Service Master as a leader, manager, they typically would be given the opportunity to purchase some Service Master stock as part of that opportunity. And I can remember this one time where an individual got the news that he was promoted, and he was very thankful for it. He called me and he said, Bill, we've talked to my wife about it. We're ready to move. They had kids. They had to move from the east to California, big move for them. He said, but there's only one thing that's bothering us. We don't know if we want to buy any more Service Master stock. So I said, well, when will you be in town next? Well, I'll be in town next week. I said, well, let's sit down and talk about it. So we did. We had breakfast together. And he said, we might have to borrow some money to buy the stock, and we just don't feel comfortable about that. And I said, well, here, let's take this napkin and draw a little T account, your balance sheet. and see what's on it. And we went on to the asset side, and he had a couple of cars, they had a boat, and they had a house, and they already had some service master stock. And then we went on the liability side, and he had a mortgage on his house. And then, you know, he had that net worth down there that balanced it all out. And he said, "That's it, Bill, right down there, that net worth." He said, "You know, if the stock goes down and we borrowed money, that goes down. We don't think our net worth is large enough at this point to do that. We've got kids we've got to put through college." And so I looked at him, I said, "Why haven't you put all your debts on your balance sheet?" He said, "Oh, Bill, I've been honest with you. I've told you everything that we owe." I said, "Well, let me ask you some questions. How many people are there in this unit that you're going to assume responsibility for?" He said, "Well, you know, I think it's about 800. I said, "A year from now, is there going to be room for 900 people in that unit or 700 people in that unit? Does your leadership have anything to do with that? How many of those people do you think are the principal breadwinners in their home?" "Well, maybe 60%, 65%. I said, "Are they going to get a raise next year? Or are they going to get a decrease in their salary? Does your leadership have anything to do with the answer to that question?" And then I got into the more softer subject. I said, you think any of these people in your unit have some difficulties in their marriage or some problems with their kids? Are they going to come and talk to you about it? Some of them may be even spiritual problems. Are they going to talk to you about it? Or is that just something you don't talk about in work? Or you sure don't talk about it to the boss? He's got nothing to contribute to it. Is your leadership going to have anything to do with the kind of people they're becoming, not only in the workplace, but in their home? And I said, you know, I could go on for the next half an hour and raise many other questions about your touching these people. But if you're telling me that all these questions are irrelevant, then you're also saying we don't need a leader. It's going to happen. Whatever happens is going to happen. But this gets back to a leader has only one choice to make, to lead or mislead.
Right.
And I said, you know, the responsibility you've assumed, what Max Dupree refers to as the posture of indebtedness you've assumed as a leader to the people, is much larger than anything you've put on your balance sheet. And if you don't want to assume that debt, that obligation to the people, don't take the job.
Did he take the job?
He took the job. And after a while, he thought about it and bought some service master stock, too.
That's a great illustration. You also, though, in addition to dealing with a management team, would have interactions with some of the people, even in the lowest part, so-called lowest part of the organization.
Yeah.
How did it affect your
conversations? Well, you know,
there?
I think my predecessors in Service Master, Ken Hansen and Ken Westner, both recruited me to come to the company. And as I came into Service Master, I came as a senior vice president. And they had my duties all laid out for me. The first 8 weeks of my job, I was out in the field doing the service work we did as a company. And little did I realize I didn't even understand what I was going to be asked to do when they said that. It was kind of a shock for me. And Ken Hansen said, "Don't worry about it. You'll be able to come in the evening and do your work as senior vice president." But it was identifying with the people at all levels of our organization. And it was right at that principle of never ask somebody to do something you're not willing to do yourself. And when you actually do the acts of service, you understand some of the opportunities, some of the challenges. For example, I can remember I was working in a hospital one day, and one of the things I realized when I was mopping floors in hospitals as part of the cleaning department, housekeeping department, was that you got rarely called your first name. It was, "Hey, you, come over here." Anyway, I was preparing to mop a hallway, and you had to put signs that's water and so forth. I got all my signs up. I'm mopping the floor, and a lady stops. She's walking by on the other side. She stops and looks at me, and she says, "Aren't you Bill Pollard?" And I said, I looked at her, I didn't recognize right away, and I said, yes, I am. And then she identified who she was, and she was a shirt-tail relative of my wife. And then she leaned over a little closer to my ear, and she said, is everything all right at home? And I said, no, I have a new job. And then we laughed a little and talked about it. But it's again, the perception. She wondered, are you no longer a lawyer? Or she didn't know I started with service management. But in any event, so there's all those emotions and feelings as part of the job. And one of the things after that experience that I decided to do with the help of my senior team was to institute a process where everybody in Service Master, once a year, did our service work. Whether you're in the accounting department, the IT department, whether you're in operations, and it was a different service each year. And as I went out, I learned, every time I learned something about what we were asking or imposing or supporting or not supporting for that worker to get the job done.
How did that affect the attitude of the workers when they saw you doing this?
Well, sometimes, they usually were surprised, what are you doing out here? And I can remember one time when I did this for a week in a large manufacturing plant in Southern California where we were having all kinds of problems implementing our services and getting productivity. We had to deal with a big union. And so one of the things I learned that week was that most of our workers in that plant, we paid every 2 weeks. Most of our workers didn't have a checking account. When they got their check, they went to a currency exchange and got ripped off for so much, so that was another deduction from their pay. A lot of them spent their grocery money at the front end of the 2-week period and all of it. So near the end of the period, we'd be much better off if we could have paid them daily in cash. Mm-hmm. And we worked out a plan where we ultimately did that. So it was like a debit card that they had. It was just realizing the culture, the differences in some of the cultures they were coming from too. And the workplace was really the most stable element of their life, many of them. Mm. So when you introduce change in the workplace, it was double traumatic because of all of the change and difficulties that were going on in their home lives.
Mm. Very challenging. Sometimes as a leader, you have an idea that we ought to do it this way, but all of the management team won't go along with the idea. How do you deal with that kind of dissonance?
It's one thing to make a decision, it's another thing to implement it.
Right.
And if you don't have the troops with you, you will not implement it. So the reality is, until they're sold, it's not a decision. That's the reality of it all. Yeah. No matter how good you think it is. You got to bring them along, and sometimes that takes time, sometimes that takes dipping, and sometimes that takes changing what you think should have been done.
Yeah. And if we're going to talk about this subject in general, management education, even in a secular university, how can we develop some of these ideas for people that are not a part of the faith?
Well, one of the ways in which Peter encouraged me to do this in a broader sense than just simply a Christian audience was to raise the question of the purpose of the business. Can the business firm produce goods and services, excel at serving the customers, make money, create wealth for shareholders, and also be a moral community for the development of human character? And I think that's a huge question in management today. It's a huge question as we're teaching management. It's a huge question as we've come through this last major economic downturn. I want to share experience with you that I had about 6 months ago with an investment banker in New York from a firm everybody would recognize if I mentioned the firm. And we were having lunch together, and he was complaining about all the new regulations and what was coming down the pike and what they were going to have to live with and implementing them. And I said, weren't you guys involved in packaging these mortgages and selling them and the way or something? Yeah, we were. And I said, did anybody in your firm ask the question, would they be a buyer of what they were selling? You know, he just looked down the table. And I said, why? Why did one person raise that question? See, the only question that was raised was, get it packaged, get it sold, make the profit. And the fundamental question wasn't being raised. And it needs to be raised in any environment, certainly in a business environment. Is what you're making, is what you're selling something you would buy?
Yeah. It's interesting you put it that way, because that suggests that when you care about people, it's not only the employees and customers, but it's about what the product will do to those people.
It sure is, yeah, yeah.
Well, thanks for being a part of this. I know that we're going to be better because of your remarks, and I've just appreciated everything you've done over the years, and thanks for doing this.
Well, thank you, Al. And I'd like to close your time, or my remarks, with a passage from Scripture. I'm sure most of you are familiar with those words of Joshua in the closing days of his leadership. Let me just read them to you. From Joshua chapter 24. Now therefore, fear the Lord, and serve him in sincerity and faithfulness. Choose this day whom you will serve. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Now that word serve in the Hebrew language also means worship. And it also means work. And that's about what you've been talking about today. How our work can be a worship to God as we serve others. Thanks for listening.